On August 18, 2025, the world edged closer to a nightmare. What Russia believed to be a Ukrainian fighter jet was, in reality, an American F-35A Lightning to silently cutting through international airspace above the Baltic Sea in the span of mere seconds. The fragile line between tense peace and open war was shattered. From a launch pad inside Kaliningrad, a nearly 4,000-pound missile thundered into the sky. It was a 4.8 and 6 dm surface-to-air missile, part of Russia's fearsome S-400 Triumph defense system. The weapon screamed upward at Mach 14, faster than nearly anything on Earth, hunting its target with lethal precision. The missile never scored a direct hit, but it didn't need to. Its detonation ripped the F-35 apart with a shockwave so violent it tore off both wings, leaving the American pilot fighting for his life. Over a secure channel, his final broadcast came through. Calm, strained, and chilling. Mayday hit. Over the Baltic Sea, aircraft failing, attempting ditch. That one transmission would ignite a chain of events far greater than a single skirmish. In Washington, leaders did not see a tragic accident. They saw a deliberate strike, an act of war. Within hours, the USS Gerald R received the order to respond. From its decks and escorts, the skies and seas erupted 68 suicide drones, 25 fighter jets, and 20 Tomahawk missiles surged forth, all aimed at one of Russia's most heavily fortified bastions. The world stood stunned. Was this the result of a Russian miscalculation or a carefully staged provocation to justify war? Could America's strike group possibly break through Kaliningrad's dense wall of radar, missiles, and interceptors? The story begins at 9:42 a.m. Baltic time. The sky, usually heavy with tension but rarely with fire, was alive with the hum of routine patrols. The American F-35A, launched hours earlier from RAF Lakenheath in the United Kingdom, was cruising at 32,000 feet. Designed to be unseen, its stealth profile gave commanders confidence that it could glide undetected across contested airspace. But stealth wasn't enough that morning. 70 miles northwest, inside Kaliningrad's labyrinth of bunkers and hardened missile silos, the silence broke. Operators at an S-400 command center stared at their glowing screens. A faint blip appeared, one they swore matched the signature of a Ukrainian jet. In hushed Russian voices, an order was confirmed. Fire. The missile launched with a roar that shook the earth. Over 20 feet long, weighing nearly 2 tons, it clawed through the sky faster than the human eye could follow, leaving behind a white scar against the blue. Inside the F-35, alarms blared. The 34-year-old American pilot slammed his controls into evasive maneuvers, the G-forces crushing his body against the seat. He fired decoy flares, rolled, and dove in desperate arcs, buying himself seconds of life. For 27 agonizing seconds, death chased him through the cold Baltic air. Then impact, but not direct. The missile self-destructed less than 600 yards away. The shockwave hit like a hammer. Shrapnel shredded the jet's wing, control surfaces seized, and red warning lights flooded his console, breathing hard sweat. In his eyes, the pilot steadied himself. His voice over the encrypted channel was low, steady, almost defiant. Mayday, Mayday, Falcon 1 hit, aircraft crippled. Attempting controlled ditch. At 9:47 a.m., his jet nosed down. For one fleeting moment, he glimpsed the shredded remains of his wing catching the gray sunlight, and he knew there was no coming back. Seconds later, the fighter plunged into the Baltic waters. In Moscow, the incident was treated as a misidentification, perhaps even a warning shot gone wrong. In Washington, it was read as something far more dangerous, a deliberate Russian attack on the United States. At 4:15 a.m. Washington time, the emergency transmission reached the Pentagon. A single burst of encrypted text confirmed the nightmare aircraft hit. Pilot ejecting, immediate recovery needed. Minutes later, in the White House Situation Room, the president sat grim-faced with the Secretary of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the National Security Advisor. The room was silent as satellite images confirmed the truth. The missile had come from Kaliningrad. The odds of this being a mistake were vanishingly small. Russia had fired on America. At 4:27 a.m., the president gave his order. Prepare the fleet across the Atlantic, the USS Gerald R. 4 strike groups sprang into action, the carrier itself, to guided missile cruisers, 3 destroyers, and over 75 aircraft began preparations. Flight paths were plotted, targets locked, satellites tasked. The response would be swift and devastating, and as the first American drones and Tomahawks took flight, the world collectively held its breath. Would this be remembered as a tragic mistake spiraling out of control, or the first shot of World War III, impenetrable defenses? The assault would begin with 68 suicide drones, each one equipped with radar jamming pods and guided bombs. They would spearhead the attack. Behind them came the wall of steel 15 F-22 Raptors and 10 F-15X Eagles, every aircraft loaded with precision ordnance. For a long moment, silence hung in the Situation Room. Every officer present understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. A single missile strike had dragged the world's 2 largest nuclear powers to the brink, and now America would answer not with negotiations, but with fire. 3:30 p.m. local Baltic time. The skies over the Baltic, gray and heavy with storm. Clouds trembled as the first wave of retaliation surged to life. From the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. 68 unmanned suicide drones lifted off in rapid succession. Their wings caught the fading sun, glinting like blades. Each carried a 200-pound precision warhead and advanced pods engineered to disrupt Russian radar. The swarm expanded outward, rising into broad arcs that stretched for miles across the Baltic sky. They were the vanguard. Behind them, the second wave prepared to strike the spearhead of American steel. 15 F-22 Raptors and 10 F-15EX Eagle E's climbed to combat altitude, their engines screaming, their holds bristling with JDAM smart bombs and AMRAAM missiles. On the carrier deck below, sailors stood frozen, watching in silence. All knew the truth. Within 30 minutes, the world could tumble into all-out war. Deep inside Kaliningrad's fortified bunkers, alarms blared. Russian operators, overwhelmed by a storm of false returns, saw their radar screens bloom with hundreds of phantom contacts. The American drones were flooding the airwaves, jamming and scrambling every system. But not every radar went blind. Secondary battery span CRS-1S and Buchem 3 South cut through the interference, locking onto real targets. The Russians fired first. A blistering salvo of 18 surface-to-air missiles clawed skyward, corkscrewing through the haze. Within 90 seconds, 12 drones were annihilated, bursting into spheres of fire. One crippled drone spun out of control, veering dangerously close to the Raptors before an escorting Eagle vaporized it with a quick cannon burst. For a heartbeat, the battlefield teetered on chaos, the hunters nearly colliding with their guardians, but the swarm pressed on. The surviving 56 drones divided into 3 strike groups, each plunging toward radar sites and missile launchers. 3:43 p.m. the first impact slammed into an S-4O battery, erupting into a column of flame 200 feet high. Secondary explosions followed as fuel trucks and ammunition dumps detonated in a chain of destruction. Seizing the opening, the Raptors dove into attack runs. Flying in pairs, they loosed precision-guided JDAMs. Each 2,000-pound bomb screamed downward at near supersonic speed. The devastation was instant. One radar dome worth $300 million was vaporized in a single strike, and a heavily reinforced command bunker cracked open like an eggshell. Still, Kaliningrad fought back. Panzer batteries unleashed torrents of autocannon fire, tracer rounds stitching across the sky. A direct burst shredded a drone cluster, sending 5 spiraling into the sea. In response, an F-15EX swooped low and dropped a GBU-39 small-diameter bomb, silencing the gun crew in a single fiery flash. By 3:50 p.m., the battle raged in a storm of steel and fire. America had already lost 17 drones, but in return, 7 major Russian air defense sites lay obliterated, their protective web ripped wide open. Above the smoke, the Raptors and Eagles regrouped, their radios filled with calm, clipped voices, preparing for the next phase of the strike. For the first time, the unthinkable had happened. The vaunted fortress of Kaliningrad, pride of Russia's defenses, was bleeding beneath the Baltic sky, and the storm was only beginning. Stay with me, the decisive strike is next. 3:51 p.m. Baltic skies, the first assault had carved gaping holes in Kaliningrad's defenses, but the fortress was not yet broken. In subterranean command centers, Russian officers barked frantic orders. Surviving S-300V for S and Panzer S-1 batteries swiveled skyward, their launch tubes rising like steel fangs. Within 60 seconds, another 20 surface-to-air missiles leapt into the sky, contrails weaving white scars across the clouds. Some of these missiles surged faster than Mach 10. The drone swarm scattered in desperate maneuvers, but the Raptors and Eagles had no such luxury. 3:53 p.m. The sky ripped open with a thunderclap. An F-15EX Eagle II aircraft worth $87 million took a direct hit from an S-300. The jet disintegrated mid-air, raining fire and twisted wreckage into the Baltic Sea. Both pilots ejected, but their parachutes never had a chance. They were swallowed by flames before touching the waves. Across every headset came the grim transmission, "Eagle down, Eagle down." Seconds later, another missile detonated perilously close to an F-2. Shrapnel shredded its engine housing, tearing through its stealth skin. Warning lights screamed inside the cockpit. The pilot fought desperately to keep control, smoke trailing as he clawed for altitude. The crippled jet limped away toward international waters, trailing smoke like a wounded predator forced from the hunt. What had once been the world's most advanced fighter was reduced to a battered survivor, clinging to life. For a brief but terrifying moment, the Americans stared into the abyss every commander dreads, overwhelming enemy firepower threatening to unravel hard-won games. The remaining Raptors twisted through evasive maneuvers, their stealth profiles saving them from radar lock. The F-15 Eagles, however, burdened by bulkier frames and less stealth, bore the brunt of the assault, forced to fight under a storm of hostile fire. Then at precisely 3:58 p.m., the counter-strike came. Far out at sea, the USS Thomas Hudner, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer patrolling 110 miles offshore, received the coordinates of the Russian command hub. Within seconds, its vertical launch cells roared alive, 20 Tomahawk cruise missiles, each carrying a 1,000-pound warhead, blasted free from their tubes, climbing into the Baltic skies before leveling into attack runs. They flew low and fast, hugging the Earth at nearly 550 miles per hour, weaving through valleys and over treetops. Russian radar scrambled to track them, but many systems were already crippled. At 4:02 p.m., the first Tomahawk slammed into a fortified bunker, the explosion ripping a 30-ton steel blast door from its hinges and tossing it skyward like a sheet of paper. Seconds later, another missile shredded a command post, killing more than 24 Russian officers in an instant. The bombardment did not pause. Missile after missile hammered hardened sights. A $250 million radar dome was annihilated in a single strike. An ammunition warehouse erupted in a chain reaction of secondary detonations, the shockwaves rattling windows 10 miles away. Flames clawed 300 feet into the air as oily black smoke twisted toward the heavens. By 4:07 p.m., Kaliningrad's proud command network lay in ruins. Nearly half its senior officers were dead or unaccounted for. Communications between air defense units collapsed into static and silence. The Russians had hurled everything into their counterattack, yet the Americans replied with unrelenting steel and fire, but victory carried a price. Two of the Navy's most advanced fighters were gone, along with the pilots who flew them. Aboard the Gerald R. Their absence burned deeper than any triumph. The flames rising over Kaliningrad carried the weight of sacrifice. And still, the battle was not finished. The decisive blow had yet to fall. 4:30 p.m., August 18, 2025. The fall of Kaliningrad, the firestorm, had ended, but its consequences were only beginning to unfold. What had once stood as the jewel of Russia's western defenses was now nothing more than shattered concrete and blackened rubble. Satellite imagery confirmed the unthinkable. In just 47 minutes, over 72% of Kaliningrad's entire air defense infrastructure had been obliterated. The losses were catastrophic. Intelligence intercepts revealed that at least 47 Russian officers had been killed, including 3 generals and 9 senior colonels, along with more than 400 soldiers dead or wounded. Ammunition stockpiles that had taken a decade to assemble were gone in less than an hour. Damage estimates soared past $6.4 billion, erasing equipment, fortifications, and command assets alike. For the United States, the cost was painful but limited: 2 fighters lost, 2 pilots dead. A heavy sacrifice, yet in exchange the entire backbone of Russia's Baltic shield had been shattered. Of the 12 radar sites guarding Kaliningrad, only 1 remained partially operational, and even it ran on emergency power, blind to stealth aircraft. As evening approached, intercepted Russian radio painted a picture of collapse. Surviving troops were ordered to abandon their positions. Truck convoys fled inland. Families evacuated coastal villages, fearing another wave of destruction. For the first time in decades, the fortress Moscow had declared untouchable fell silent. On the decks of the Gerald R. sailors gazed east at the towering plumes of smoke. The cost had been measured in blood, but the outcome was undeniable. America had not only avenged its fallen aviators, it had erased an entire stronghold from the map. And with that, the world faced a chilling reality. When America answers, the battlefield itself ceases to exist. As the smoke drifted west across the Baltic Sea, the global order trembled. In under an hour, a single missile launch from Kaliningrad had triggered catastrophe for Moscow. The U.S. response 68 drones, 25 fighters, and 20 Tomahawk missiles had brought about total annihilation. The tally was grim: more than 400 Russian casualties, billions in destroyed infrastructure, and a fortress reduced to silence. Yet America's victory was not bloodless. 2 pilots had fallen that day, their jets burning in hostile skies. On the Gerald R. their absence was felt more deeply than any celebration could conceal, but their sacrifice had meaning. It reminded the world that American resolve is forged not only in steel and fire, but also in the lives willingly laid down in its defense. Kaliningrad, once hailed as unbreakable, now stood as a smoldering warning to allies. It proved that America would act decisively when threatened. To adversaries, it carved an unmistakable lesson in ruins: strike at an American aircraft, and the reply will not be measured in words, but in annihilation.